Okay, students, this is going to be a quick run through of the steps needed to successfully lay out the UVWs for our alien monster. First and foremost, you'll see that I have them cut in half. If you happen to have a symmetry modifier, you can turn that off. I'm just going to clean up and condense my stack. So I'm just going to collapse all. I'm going to convert this to an editable poly. You can do that directly just by going to right click on your object, convert to, and select editable poly. From here, we're going to kind of prime this for the UVWs. We're going to start by putting the Unwrap UVW modifier in our stack. If you take a look at this, you'll probably have the same thing initially, just these random seams. That's the green lines there, and they're just kind of scattered around. To prime this, we're going to do a quick planar projection on the Z, Y, or X axis. Doesn't really matter. We do want to make sure that we don't have anything selected when we do this. Or sorry, we need to have everything selected when we do this so that everything is impacted. So what this does is it just cleans up all of my seams to one spot or one edge. Okay, just the open edges for the eye, the mouth, and the middle there. That's perfect. Because we're going to be using the pelt mapping technique, and that requires or includes the use of seams. And those green seams were done automatically by just the generation of our modeling and software by default, but we're taking full control with the Unwrap UVWs modifier. So once I've got my planar projection implemented, my seams should just be, again, relegated to just this side over here. But we're going to next go into the seams section of our modify panel, and we're going to use the point-to-point seams. We're going to do this in edge selection mode. Just deselect all the edges first. And what this will do is actually let us switch between doing the seams by point to point or by selection. And either one will be really convenient. I like using the edge selection because it includes things like loop and ring. And one thing to take note of, for my model, I extruded the geometry way back for the eyes and the mouth, and something that we'll need to think about is how deep that transition goes, and it creates this like perpendicular surface. That's something to keep in mind when you're laying out your UVs, especially when we're doing the pelt process, that system of layouts. Basically, selecting everything as is would just give us a big jumbled mess. So what I'm doing is looking for places where there's drastic changes, and that's where I want to put my seams. So this is like a drastic change from the outer surface to this 90-degree turn to go to this straight back extrusion. So I'm actually going to select that. If I'm in my edge modes, it's a double click to do an edge loop. And then I'm just going to convert that with my seams options here. It's convert edge selection to seams. That's going to turn that a different color, indicating that I have a seam that's there now. Okay, same thing for the mouth. I'm going to use this corner transition here. That kind of marks the edge that shares both the inside and the outside. And there's that stark transition from this flat interior section to the lip. So we're going to make that a seam as well. Next, we're going to do around the arm. So that double click carries this edge loop down. We don't want those, so I can actually hold Alt and deselect. And I can just take a second to fill those in. Next, I'll show you the point to point. This will work in polygon selection mode as well. So this one just lets you start, even if you're in polygon selection mode, the point to point recognizes the edges as where the seams will be. And I just clicked to start on one end, and then it's going to try to estimate, depending on where I put my cursor, the best route via the edges to where my point is. So it's going to map out all the edges in between. So just click there, and that automatically gives me a seam to that point. And for the arm, we're gonna create a seam up to there, and I'm gonna right click to end that. What's gonna happen here when we flay this out with the pelt map is that these will be connected, but they'll be a seam and split these polygons so that the geometry will lay flat, just like we need. Okay. So for me, I had to do one for the eye socket. If your eye socket doesn't go back, the extrusion doesn't go back too far, you may be able to get away without doing it. But typically a character will have like closed geometry, so the mouth would be closed and it would kind of be its own UV island for the details inside the mouth if you have a talking or expressive character. All right, but that's all we need for our seams for this half of our monster. So next we can deactivate our seams maker, and we can go right into our pelt map. So when you activate pelt map, you're going to get your UV editor is going to open up, and you're going to want to be in your polygon selection mode. And when you start pelts, you do need to have some of these selected. Backtrack here, there we go. So we're going to select these all, and you want to make sure that your whole object gets selected. This icon right here is called ignore backfacing. You want to deactivate that if you want to do the sweep selection for it to go all the way through your geometry. Okay, so with that selected, I should be able to activate pelt, and this is the system for the pelt that I was looking for. So these little red lines serve as like springs that attach to all the exterior points of your border or your seams, and it literally just pulls at them and flattens out your mesh. So when you go to start pelt, this is the result. Okay, all those lines try to straighten out, and the polygons inside your mesh get pulled and flattened out. Next, you can do a start relax, and this will take a couple seconds, and it's going to try to let your polygons kind of ease back into a natural shape. That is your UVs that correspond to the shape of your model's polygons. And one relax there should be fine. Just commit that. And this is what you should be left with. I'm going to activate my element selection mode here. Click there. Okay. And we're just checking to make sure that none of our geometry is overlapping or pinched. That's a bit of a problem, but this is something we can fix quickly with stitching. Need to deactivate element mode. I'm going to take a look at what's going on there. So that is indeed just an open stitch. I'm going to right click and stitch selected. Not sure what's going on there. I've got some issues with my geometry showing up, but we will alleviate that soon. Let's go ahead and do the arm. I'm going to select the polygons for the arm in polygon selection mode. I can use my grow. That's just the plus and minus sign, grow and shrink right here. So with those selected, I'll activate my pelt once again. Start pelt. And then I'll do a relax. Okay. Gonna confirm that or commit. And yeah, just some visual glitches that are going on here. I'm not sure why, but that's okay. This is a good start, and we can continue relaxing our UVs with our tools. Go to the tools menu, choose relax, and you can see what the default will do. Nothing good there, so we're going to go to by poly. I like to increase my amount and then click apply. I'm going to do that a couple times until, again, it seems like everything is stretching out without overlapping. That's the main thing here. We'll do the same for our geometry. And this is part of the mouth that got selected, so we'll address that separately. Just a moment. We'll deselect that. Just isolate the arm. Relax that a few times. So these two pieces are finished. I'm going to grab all the remaining UVs. That should be my interior. I'm just going to do a quick flatten mapping for that. That's going to lay those out nice and flat. And I'm going to shrink those down, holding control so they stay uniform. You can even relax these a bit and make sure that they don't overlap. You could take a couple seconds to stitch these, or you can adjust the flatten mapping to be way up, more than 90 degrees. And that should combine them into bigger chunks, but I'm happy with that. To situate these back into place, I'm going to use my polygon selection mode, and I'm going to go to Tools, Pack UVs. Click OK. And for right now, I don't need to position these very much, but we will, in our next step, we're going to duplicate this and finish out the UV template. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to just for safekeeping, I'm going to collapse this again back to an editable poly. And what that does is just confirms the position of those UVs into my mesh. I'm going to add a symmetry modifier. And before I got started, I made sure that my model was on the origin and that the pivot was at the far right side. So it is on the x-axis where I need my symmetry, but I just need to flip this. And if my pivot is positioned well, then I don't need to make any further adjustments to my symmetry. But if I need to, I'll just activate the mirror and move this as needed to get the full edge, or the connection across that whole edge in the middle without any overlap. You do want to make sure that weld seam is active for your symmetry. And just looking at this, I have a little bit of a gap. I'm going to fix that with an edit poly function. I'm just going to double click both sides of this. You got to get real close. I'm going to hold control to add to my selection. So both of those open edges, just for good measure. It looks like the front is just fine, but both of those all the way to there are open. So all I need to do is make them planar according to my x-axis, and that's going to seal that right up. But they're still separate, so I need to weld across there. So I'm going to hold control, click on my vertex, and what that does is converted my edges into all of the vertices. So I have 52 selected vertices, and then when I hit weld, they all go to half, so 27, and that means that all of these combine down into one where there was two. Now if I do a border selection, the only open edges I should see are the ones inside the mouth and the back of the eyes. Okay. Now we sealed those, so we have a nice contiguous shell for our character. We're going to go back into our UVW editor. Okay, now because we did half of the UVs first, we literally cut our work in half. So right now what's happening is we have two sets of UVs that are stacked on top of each other. So I'm going to use my polygon selection mode with element active so that I can separate these. So this is the left side. and I can see where the mitt or the end of the hand is. So I'm going to keep this one on the left side. This is the right side, but it's oriented the exact same as the left. So what I want to do is mirror this. I'm going to flip this, and that's one of my transform tools up there. It's just a combination of rotate and negative scale, actually. So I'm going to line that, and then I'm going to do the same thing for this side. So notice I clicked in the viewport, and it activates that corresponding UV in my UV editor. I'm going to use the grow on this side. I need to just right click in here just to activate this window so my grow will work. And I keep growing until it gets all the way to the edge. And because this is actually a separate UV island, I only get where it's all the way up to the edge where it's separated. If I did the grow over here, it would continue all the way across my mesh because it's all connected on the geometry side. So I'm just going to undo until I get back to that half. I'm going to give this the same treatment with mirror. Now that these are facing each other, I'm going to find this common seam all the way down to this bottom like foot area. So I'm going to use my edge selection, take off element. If I double click here, I should get a good start. I'm just actually going to deselect several of these and just refine this down to that right there. And with those selected, I'm going to use my stitch option. So I'm right clicking to pull up my quad menu. I'm purposefully looking for stitch selected and then clicking on the options. And for this one, I can adjust the bias either way, but I do want it to be right at 0.5 if it's not. So click OK. That gives me a nice even straight line as their commonplace. And next, I'm going to switch back to my polygon selection mode. I'm going to select these big pieces. Take a second just to do a quick polygon angles relax again. That's just going to ease these things right back into place. And I'm going to use the pack UVs with that selection with linear. Normalized clusters is good, rescale clusters is good. This is going to give the same relative size, and that's going to help to maintain our texel resolution, and I'll test that next. So click OK. All right, so everything is fitting inside of our space. If you want, you can kind of rotate these to be a little more straight. And you can set the priority for these however you want. You do want to make sure that there's not any overlaps. I'm getting real close. That's clear. These are laid out really well. And just making sure that the mouth parts here, which actually, just real quick, I'm going to map these a little differently. So with all those selected, I'm going to use a planar projection map. I'm going to project along the y-axis. That's going to give me this kind of traced out smiley face, which is fun to look at. All right, I'm going to carefully select my edges on the back end here. So double click there. And I'm just going to shrink these in. Same on the other side, double click, holding Control and Alt and scaling in. And lastly, same thing for the mouth. Scaling in. So these I'm going to bunch together. Get them really close to each other. Use my polygon selection mode here. And yeah, for these, I'm going to relax these using centers and holding the outer boundaries. And I'm going to do that quite a few times. And this is just going to give some space to the UVs there. And then I can do kind of a low amount and a few iterations on that. All right. All right, so this is just to make sure nothing's overlapping and kind of out of the way, and everything has a little bit of UV space. That way some pixel information will be visible. Okay, next thing we'll do is start setting up the custom texture using the Viewport Canvas. Okay, so the UVs are all done. Go ahead and collapse this back into just the editable poly. Okay, so for our next phase, after we've gone through and laid out our UVWs, we're going to apply a custom texture using a tool called Viewport Canvas. Before we get started with that, kind of a preliminary step is to go ahead and assign a basic material to this. So I'm just going to make a physical material and just go ahead and attach it or drag it out from the output socket to my model. You could also select the material node, select the object or the model in the viewport, and use the option for assign material to selection. What this is going to do is just kind of make sure we have a landing place for the custom textures that we're going to compile using this tool. So once that's done and our UVs are laid out, you can just double check those real quick. I did revisit these just a bit from earlier, and mainly it was just retouching the interior of the mouth and the eye sockets, but we've got our layout there, nothing's overlapping. It's very important when we are doing this custom texture workflow. You don't want any of your UVs overlapping. Okay, and I'll just collapse this one more time. Now we're going to navigate to our tools menu and we're going to activate Viewport Canvas. This is going to pull up this toolbox for Viewport Canvas. You'll notice it's got tools for paintbrush. This one's eraser. It's got clone stamp, fill or paint bucket, gradient. These are similar to what you might find in any other creative software. We have some that are kind of effects like blur and smudge, sharpen, things to adjust contrast. So these will all help to manipulate the layers that you're going to generate for adding texture and detail to your mesh right inside the viewport. I'll explain the brush images here in just a moment. These are not the defaults, so you may see something different, but I'll explain how and why those are important. Okay. To get this started, you want to make sure that you click on one of the brush or any of the tools that are going to apply pixel information. So if I activate brush, I'm going to get this prompt. Now, at this point, if you have not applied a material, the prompt will be different. It's going to ask you what kind of material you want first, and then it's going to ask you what channel of the material you want to assign this custom texture to. And base color or diffuse is the default for showing the color of your surface, but any of these can accept the texture information that you're going to generate using the Viewport Canvas. So I'm going to go with base color. Next prompt is going to be for the resolution of the texture file that I'm going to generate. So 1024 is It's pretty good. It's a high resolution for a simple model like this. 2048 is going to be for super detailed models. You can even go higher than that. And you can manually put numbers in here. This is where you can pick your base color. I might start off with something kind of green. And we're going to establish a file path. So I've already made a folder for my alien monster project. So I'm already in that folder. You can do this in your downloads or something convenient, easy to remember. But you want to be mindful of the texture type or the file type that you are creating. So this is where you're going to assign a JPEG, a PNG. Some of these other compressions might be popular with games or other real-time renderer for exports, but we'll stick with the standard common bitmaps of JPEG or PNG. I'm going to assign a JPEG and give it a name. This will be my alien monster VM for a diffuse map. I'm going to go to save and set the compression for my JPEG. Okay, so still nothing's happened yet, but once I click OK, you'll see that the base color takes place. It becomes my background layer. You'll see that the layers panel has popped up. There's pretty abbreviated set of commands here compared to other creative software, but this technique is really good for kind of setting up targets for different patterns and stuff that you might refine further in other software. But you can get a pretty good distance, especially for kind of low poly characters or objects, just right inside the Viewport Canvas. So what I'm going to do next is start adding layers. So the plus sign with the little stack of papers is going to allow me to add more layers. And basically when I'm starting off a texture with this technique, I want to take advantage and use my layers. Anytime I want to add a different design or color, I'm going to switch layers and then combine them into one later on once I'm committed to the appearance. That's important to follow. So with my brush active, I can see my brush options here. You can go larger, get a larger brush shape. You can adjust the opacity. Hardness is going to be the edge and the kind of drop off or softening of that edge. What you're seeing here, this brown tint, is from my brush images. If I turn that off, this is just going to look at the color of my brush. You can see that appear there. Okay. Masking is kind of like, yeah, it'll set the opacity of the brush image. You can use a mask for just the color as well. Just to demonstrate that real quick. You have a few presets here. There are ways that you can customize this menu, but they're tucked into a library in the install folders. But so I could do something like this. Maybe change this to something not so different from the skin tone. And particularly this brush needs a little bit of distance. I'm missing here. There we go. So I might reduce the spacing down. Spacing is going to be how often it repeats as you drag. So just a little tug on this will give me the pattern on my mesh. That one, I think, doubled up. But you get the idea. So my edge faces, and you can see that. So you can kind of start creating some custom detail across the surface of your mesh. And when you go to the 2D view, this is where it correlates to your UV layout. So hopefully you can see that. And you can also paint right on top of your UVs as well, and that will translate over to your mesh. So this is one reason why you want the UVs to be laid out in a comprehensive and connected way, so that, if you have a graphic or a detail in your texture that goes from one side of your mesh to the other, it's a nice cohesive transition and not interrupted by harsh edges that aren't intuitively separated, or are separated but not with a lot of intention. So you can continue to operate in your viewport and see the effects translate to the 2D view. Like so. All right, turn this off. You can continue to explore different effects. Again, you want to take advantage of using these layers as often as possible. I'm going to add a gradient. So I'm going to activate gradient. I'm on a different layer, paying attention to my color. And I can just trace this out as well. I'm going to remove that mask, take the use off there, and try the gradient again so it's a little more evident. And let's make it much darker. There you go. And you can see that. And that layer gets filled in, and it is independent now of my other details, and that's ideal. So once you have successfully generated a custom texture, you want to make sure that you use the file button here. You're going to save a PSD, so save PSD as. You click there, and you want to make sure that you preserve the layers. That's why the PSD option is important. So this will be my alien monster DM, and that'll save as a PSD when I confirm. Ultimately, you are going to save the bitmap as flattened. So you go here, and again, you're going to use JPEG or PNG. And I'm going to use this as my base, but this is my diffuse map. And this is tucked into my Alien Monster project folder as well. So now those textures are in place. From here, I can start to close down my tools, and you're going to get a prompt. If you haven't saved, you're going to see a prompt for making sure that you preserve and save that PSD information. Okay, so now this is where I started, and I'm just going to do a quick sample. So here's where the prompt is. So you can see you can save as PSD file. I've already got that saved. You can flatten layers and save to the current texture and so on. I'm going to do this option. And you're going to notice a subtle change, but this is because this is now applied to a different material. And that's why I wanted to sample this. Okay. So now what you're seeing is the effects of the material setting. And for this, I'm just going to drop the reflections way down, so it takes that sheen off. And the texture information is right here as a bitmap, as it should be. Okay. That's how you use the Viewport Canvas. Thanks for watching.